You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me on another edition of Inside Automotive right here at CBTnews.com. We're so happy to have with us Mr. Brian Finkelmeyer with Cox Automotive once again in the studio. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us in the studio.
Hey Jim, it's always good to see you.
Yeah, it's always good to see you in the studio. You know, the Zooms are fun and everything, but there's nothing better than having somebody sit in that seat across from me. Makes for a much better interview.
I don't miss the Zoom calls with you.
No, exactly. So what are you hearing out there in the way of new car? You are one of those industry types that's got their ear to the ground. I always love talking to you because you're like, all right, here's the skinny. Here's what's really going on. So what are you hearing out there about the new car business?
Well, Jim, I think it is, this month kind of marks perhaps a turning point, I think, in the business that we've seen here. We've kind of all gotten happy with full sticker and sell to zero and lots of being, empty largely. And it's at this exact moment where manufacturing has really started to rebound. And in fact, last month they produced almost as many cars as they were producing before the pandemic.
Really?
So about 1.5 million before the pandemic. Yeah. Last month, about 1.39 million.
Okay. Yeah, you're
so
in the
just
hunt.
A little bit behind. But so at this exact moment in time where we begin getting some daylight on the production, we're starting to see some softening on the demand side as consumers are being pressed with rising costs of living, food, and gas, and the interest rates continue to climb. And I think the Fed has signaled that there might be more interest rates. And one of the things that's happened with that is just that the monthly payment of vehicles has become more expensive. We looked on just a Toyota RAV4 year over year, the same exact car is about $55 a month more expensive this year than it was a year ago.
Yeah. Not totally a deal breaker, but I think also peppered in there too, as one friend of mine said. He said, my wife and I are doing great. We're making a lot of money and everything's great. He goes, but we are concerned about this looming recession. Bloomberg came out yesterday and said, 100% chance there's going to be a recession, right? Now, I don't mean to be a naysayer out there, guys and girls that are listening to me and say, Jim's talking about recession. However, we have to be a realist about this, right? And that might be the case, right? It looks like with Bloomberg, they said, no, it's going to be the case. It's just a question of when, not if. But that being said, there's some apprehension on behalf of consumers today that go, things are good for me right now, but I don't know that they're going to be good for me 6 months from now, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is they track consumer sentiment of just American consumers' feelings about the future. And if you look at that graph back in March of 2020, right when COVID hit, it dropped down to 80.2.
Right.
Well, today it's actually lower, just a little bit lower than what it was even in March of 2020.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot of trepidation out there in the marketplace right now where consumers are becoming a little bit cautious and, as you said, a little concerned about what the next 6 to 12 months might bring.
Right. So you think dealers are actually going to have to discount off of MSRP?
Well,
off of sticker price?
It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine the other night who is a manufacturer rep, and he was saying that a lot of his dealers that used to have 8 to 10 cars in stock now have 50, 60 cars in stock.
Yeah.
Maybe by next month that might be 100 cars in stock.
Right.
So just as I said, as we begin to start seeing more cars on carrier trucks is at the exact moment that things have begun to soften a little bit on the retail side.
Right. And as you know, dealers need to still work that turn. So as they've always had to do in the industry. So now all of a sudden they got the 50 cars, they got to get them out of there. So it's, hey, call that customer back that didn't want to pay sticker price and knock $1,000 off and let that car roll, right?
Yeah,
we need that punch.
Well, I think the days of the fish jumping in the boat maybe are behind us. We're going to have to go out and get back to fishing, right?
That's right. My wife and I just bought a car, paid over sticker price for the car. Well over sticker price for the car, because it's you can't get these cars, and these cars sell for another $40,000 down in Miami or whatever. They're in big demand, and not that we're selling it or what have you, but I think I'm going to be driving just a few short months from now, and somebody will call me from a dealership and go, I could have saved you $10,000 on that car. So I think times are changing a little bit in that respect.
For sure.
Do you think that the demand, though, is, we've spoken to people at Cox Automotive and Bloomberg Intelligence and such, and Cars.com, and they said the demand still, though, if you look at the numbers, is still in the millions out there that still need cars. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think that so much of the industry is driven based on, this group of customers that needs a new car, which is a life-changing event, or my lease is up, or there's just kind of this normal flow of vehicles. And even last month, even as people are talking about things being a little bit soft, the industry still did 1.12 million new vehicle sales, which was up a little bit from a year ago.
Okay.
So things are still moving, but I think people are beginning to see some early maybe indications of warning signs that this sell to the lot is empty might be a thing of a past.
Right. So this is a perfect segue to talk to you about the used car market, because we all know that because of the shortage of new cars, the value of used cars shot up. Dealers were selling everything that they could on the used car side as well. They're paying almost retail, some cases retail, for a 2-year-old car to try to get, a couple of grand over that on a used vehicle. I mean, the last couple of years have been crazy.
Yeah.
So with this situation with new cars, we're seeing a major softening of used cars? Or at least
so I think there's some warning indications there, and one of the big warnings that happened last week was CarMax announced their quarterly earnings, and it was off 56% year over year, and
that's scary.
So I think that they are beginning to see some of the signals of softening demand, and I think there's sort of a looming affordability crisis in the car market right now, which is, as we talked, new cars have gone to now $48,000 on average.
Unbelievable.
But if you look at used cars based on the different kind of pricing buckets, the bucket that has the most inventory and the highest day supply now is $35,000 and over. As we were talking, those were the switch cars back when we didn't have the new car inventory.
That's right.
And so at this exact moment where interest rates on used cars, Cox Automotive is now saying the average loan amount on a used car is 9-10% as a kind of a blended average across all buyers at a moment, and dealers are sitting on rising day supply and a lot of those more expensive vehicles. I think dealers are going to have to be careful as they move forward, for the remainder of this year.
Right. So does that put a kind of a crimp on the trade-ins and the values of the trade-ins? Because people are coming in still, I think, from the dealers that I talk to thinking, I'm going to get $1 million for my trade-in. It's 3 years old and I'm going to get back what I paid for it or close to it. And dealers are going, not so fast.
Right. And I think that's a great point you raised, Jim, that if you or I were running a dealership right now and the guy brings in the $48,000 truck, we might be a little skittish about bringing that in and paying all the money for it. I think what we're beginning to see, though, is if you look at the different segments of the used car market, all of a sudden compact sedans and mid-size sedans that were not hot a year ago, we're beginning to see that those have the lowest day supply of any of the. So I think that's sort of a signal that consumers are beginning to shift to that more affordable vehicles.
Low gas mileage too.
Exactly.
Right. Or high gas mileage, or but because of the cost of gas is it's all over the place. One day it's $3.15 here in Atlanta, and the next day it's $4.15. And you're like, what is going on here? So that there's still a lot of uncertainty there, right?
Yeah. So. There's I think there's just a lot of dynamics at play, both between the new and the used car business, of what's going on in the broader economy, and it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this year plays out.
Yeah, and we're starting to see too some incentives by OEMs that are coming out with 0.9% interest rate. I saw one ad that said you're going to get $500 back when you buy this vehicle. So, okay, now we're getting back into incentives to roll cars.
Yeah, so I think in the current state, we're still significantly below anywhere near we were, but maybe some certain places where they're beginning to see a little bit of rise of inventory where it's maybe necessary to put some money. But if things continue to soften, to your point, we may see some better deals. Maybe December to remember will be back again this year.
It will be a December. What is the? It's funny because dealers are probably listening to us going, "Wow, Brian and Jim are doom and gloom on the business." Where do the opportunities lie in this from your perspective? Where do you think dealers can say, "Hey, we can really, there's an opportunity here to also make a lot of money"?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Jim, that it's only doom and gloom if the competitor down the street is not taking on that mindset that the world is caving in and that guy's still playing to win, that's probably bad news for me and you.
That's right.
So I think that a lot of it, to your point, is to be thoughtful and mindful about the opportunities in the market. And I think that clearly, a 2018 compact sedan, to your point, that got 40 miles to the gallon a year ago was not really a great piece of merchandise for your used car lot. Today and tomorrow, that's probably not a bad piece to have.
That's right. So with all of this in mind, should dealers be managing their new and used car business? I mean, how should they be managing that right now?
Yeah, so I think to that point I made earlier, just about the high day supply and those more expensive vehicles, one of the interesting things I forgot to mention is that over the last 8 weeks at Manheim Auto Auction, we've seen a point of depreciation coming through the auction every single week.
Oh, wow.
So as used cars in the wholesale market are beginning to appreciate,
Right.
and we're actually seeing the conversion rates of buyers are being a little more selective about what they actually buy at auction.
Right.
And so they say there's usually about a 6-week lag between the wholesale change and then where that begins to surface itself in the retail market.
Okay.
And so I think that the indications are sort of pointing towards vehicles are going to have to start getting discounted, and that's going to pose a challenge for dealer because many of these $35,000 used cars we bought 60 days ago, 90 days ago, where we paid all the money, and now we have a situation with 1 point of depreciation every week.
That's right.
Is significant.
So
I think that is probably would be cause to say, if we're going to take action on some aged inventory, we're better off doing it today than waiting much longer.
Yeah, there's no question about it. There was a time that inventories, as you know, were actually appreciating in value. You know, a dealer might have $1.2 million today, and 2 weeks from now it's $1.6 million because of the demand of those used cars, which was crazy.
It was unbelievable. So to your point, in 2021, used car values actually appreciated 27%, which was equal to the S&P 500. So I don't think that's ever happened before. The used cars kept pace with the stock market.
That's absolutely crazy. So let me ask you this question. Last week it was announced that Honda and Sony are partnering to produce electric vehicles. Does this look like another direct-to-consumer model? Are they going to come out and say, we're not legacy. We put together this partnership. We're not Honda. So what say you on this?
Jim, it's interesting that on a lot of these announcements that we've seen, the one common thread has been a lot of these announcements are somewhat vague, perhaps on purpose.
Right.
But I think clearly there's sort of a inertia around how do we reinvent the business. And in fact, I think a week or two ago, NADA came out with a statement about this, about sort of some guiding principles of how, hey, dealers, we recognize we need to adapt, and we want to do this in a collaborative fashion with the manufacturers.
Right.
And I think by and large, the manufacturers recognize that they're not going to be able to wipe dealers off the street. They're still going to serve customers and provide service and parts and whatnot. And so I think we're at sort of an inflection point in the business, though, where probably things are going to look different in the next 5 to 10 years, and how that all takes shape is going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, I mean, Ford obviously made big headlines when they came out and said, hey, if you want to sell EVs, Mr. or Mrs. Dealer, you're going to have to abide by these 5 pillars and these 5 different elements. And they were interesting. I interviewed a number of people on this topic, Mike Maroney being one of them, and Joe Serra. And these are big car dealers in the country, as you know. And then also the senior vice president of Ford that's over the whole EV program. And it seems as though, when you hear the different 5 pillars, you're like, well, I got to tell you, from a dealer standpoint, and also, I guess I should put my OEM hat on, they're not that big of requests. I mean, it sounds like they're really putting their foot down to say, hey, Ford dealers, we're really going to mandate that you get prepared for the future, right? In the way that you communicate with the customer and you sell a car, and the pricing structure and delivering it to the home, and making sure that you've got EV stations, for fast charging and such right there at the dealership. And it kind of all makes sense, right? I mean, in fact, the 4 dealers that I talked to, Mike Maroney said he went to the meeting. It was I'm paraphrasing, it was one of the best dealer meetings he's been to. And as the former president of AutoNation, the guy's been to a lot of dealer meetings. But he said it kind of all made sense that they're not asking us to do that much. Now, for an outlying dealer someplace that goes, come on, I'm only making, maybe I'm pulling out $800,000 or $900,000 out of my store, $1 million. It's not the end of the world. And you're asking me to make this big investment in my store. But I think those are kind of outliers, right? I mean,
yeah. To my understanding, Jim, that a lot of those requirements were like essential tools to work on EVs and to have either 1 or 2 charging stations. It didn't seem obnoxious in what they were looking for.
No.
But I think we're going to definitely see that type of request being made, not just to Ford dealers, but all franchise dealers. And
that's what I say.
Let's be honest, car dealers have never had a better 2-year run in probably the history of the car business. So if there was ever a time to buy a charging station,
it would be now.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there's probably tax incentives for them to make that investment in their property, right?
Exactly.
But I agree with you. I think that the other OEMs are watching Ford and listening to Farley going, okay, we'll let him kind of break the ice with everybody, because guess what? We're going to be demanding the same things. And any progressive OEM out there pretty much has to make those. Now, I will tell you, one of the elements, one of the pillars that they talk about is pricing. They want no negotiation, kind of a flat base price that says that the consumer can bank on this being the price of the vehicle. Not this is the MSRP, but we can't get enough of them, so this is the MSRP. Right. That does not bode well with consumers today. Right?
Yeah, and I think we've talked, Jim, you and I, about Tesla, and I know that's a big topic of conversation. Just a couple weeks ago, Automotive News reported the loyalty scores of each of the different brands.
Yeah.
And Tesla's loyalty actually went up significantly. They're running about 81%.
Wow.
The highest loyalty rate in the industry.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Most car companies are on around 55 to 60%
right.
manufacturer loyalty. Tesla's at 81%.
Wow.
So I think a lot of car companies, or people like Jim Farley, are looking at Tesla saying, wow, these guys not only have 81% owner loyalty, they have 27% gross margin.
Wow.
Where the kind of conventional car manufacturers run typically 14, 15% margin.
Right.
So they're saying, boy, this guy's figured out a way to get double the margin.
That's right.
And he's got significantly higher owner loyalty. I mean, those are compelling stats.
There's no question about it. If you were I said this at a meeting recently, if you were a board member and you sat on the board at Ford, wouldn't you be raising your hand in those meetings going, how come we're not doing more of that stuff? What those guys are doing. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And because I agree, those numbers are staggering. That kind of loyalty rate, that kind of margin in the auto industry is unheard of.
Yeah.
It's to be admired, right?
For sure.
And that's what these car companies are looking at. Plus, if you talk to the consumers and you ask them, how was the purchase experience? They tell you they love it. I think we're now doing focus groups here at CBT News. We just launched a couple of them in the last couple of weeks, and one of them we spoke to a young man that purchased a Tesla, and we wanted to know how did it go? What did you think? He drove a Mercedes-Benz. He didn't trade the Mercedes-Benz in, because when he went to Tesla, they said, well, actually, here's a couple of different ways you can go. You can go to CarMax, or you can go to Carvana, and you can sell your car that way. So that's what we recommend that you do. And he said, so I went to Carvana, picked up my phone, put in my tag number, gave a little bit of other information. They came back with a number, and lo and behold, by the end of the day, my car was gone. I had a check in my hand.
Yeah.
So he said, and then of course I went into Tesla. I ordered, or this was after he ordered his vehicle, because when it came in, but he said, so I liked the way the trade went. He said, and I love the way that Tesla sold their car. He said, I did it all online. He said, I wasn't even on for an hour, and I ordered exactly the car that I wanted. Was happy with the price. They didn't play around with it, and lo and behold, the car was delivered exactly when they said it was going to be delivered. Now I'm sure all of them don't go that way. I'm sure there's some stories out there that people can tell you that I waited too long, or maybe they said it's going to be 2 weeks and it was 4 weeks, or whatever the case might be. However, you'd be hard pressed to find a Tesla customer that complains about the sales process, from what I have found.
No doubt about it, Jim. And I think there's no question that all of us, whether it's getting a cup of coffee or buying a car, the less friction that we incur, the better.
That's right.
And that I think the sales experience can become a competitive advantage for those dealers that figure out a way to remove the friction. Right. I mean, one of my favorite guys in the industry, Brian Finkelmeyer, always talks about how that's such a
frictionless process, right?
Yep.
And it's right. It's true. I mean, it's 2022 now, and people want to be able to go to their phone and get all the information. If they want to buy the car that way, great. Have it delivered to their home. I know Brian's delivering, Hondas to people, throughout the Northeast there, and people love it. And I think that is the future of the industry, right?
Yeah. And, that and buying cars in the metaverse.
That's exactly right. Which I understand they did do one of those. I think Brian Kramer did that before he left the Toyota store down in Southwest Florida. But so overall, what do you think 2023, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think 2023 is going to bring us?
I think that's a great question. Right now, Jim, I think we're forecasting about a 5% uptick in business year over year. The things are going to be a little bit better as inventory availability comes back around. But as many of the themes that you and I touched on, there's so much dynamic issues in today's market with interest rates and inflation and everything that's kind of going. You touched on the R word that we're not supposed to say, but if that happens, right? Who knows? I think we actually changed our forecast in 2022. We lowered it 4 different times from what we had called at the beginning of the year. So it's certainly kind of a moving target in these kind of unprecedented times.
Right.
But I think to your earlier point, the dealers that focus on removing customer friction, and we talked about being more mindful of what cars we're bringing into inventory and how we're appraising cars. And I think all those sort of blocking and tackling things will set dealers up for success.
That's right. And, my good friend, Mike Maroney, when I say this to him and I'll come in and say, well, Mike, what do you think about some of the headwinds at the industry? And, we got it's an election year and gas prices. And he goes, Jim, I can't control any of that, okay? None of us in our dealership can control any of that. The only thing I can control is what I do each day to be successful.
Yeah.
And that has worked for me. And I love that. I think he's got a great attitude, and I know a number of other dealers, I should say, echo that and live in that realm every single day. Sometimes in the news, us media guys are like, yeah, well, what about this and what about that? Because to some degree, we have to bring that up. We got to discuss it and talk about it. And but at the end of the day, as you know, dealers are very resilient. They're going to find a way. If tomorrow gas prices went to $10 a gallon, somehow there's going to be dealers out there selling F-150s, right?
Exactly.
For sticker price or thereabouts, and convincing those consumers that don't worry about it, the price will come down. Just take delivery today, everything will be fine. And that's what we've been doing for years, right?
Yep.
Seems to have worked.
For sure.
So, yep. Brian Finkelmeyer with Cox Automotive. Thank you so much for coming in, man. This is great. It's always great catching up with you. Really is.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.